This friendly and harmless looking man helped orchestrate one of the biggest financial frauds of all time. $4.5 billion were stolen from a sovereign wealth fund designed to help the average Malaysian citizen. The money moved into 9 countries across the world and reappeared in the hands of top Malaysian officials and even the Prime Minister. In this scheme, Jho Low is thought to be the central figure behind this crime, since the money usually went through his account first. He stole billions of dollars for himself, spending it to impress celebrities, hosting wild parties, and even funding the Wolf of Wall Street movie. And he's still on the run as a fugitive today. To start off, Jho Low was born into a Chinese Malaysian family and attended the Harrow School in London, England. You can say that this school is basically for the uber rich, since it costs about $250,000 for 4 years there, meaning that it's pretty unaffordable for the average person like you and I. And the alumni at the school is even more crazy, including 8 former British or Indian prime ministers, including Winston Churchill and Jawaharlal Nehru. Basically, if you want your kids to build connections in the future, it's going to be at this school. And this is where Jho Low met some really powerful people. At this school, Jho Low would form a friendship with Riza Aziz, and this would be an extremely powerful connection. It turns out that Riza is the stepson of the future Malaysian Prime Minister, and the 3 of them are going to form a pretty close relationship that is pretty instrumental to the 1MDB fraud. After high school, Jho Low would attend the University of Pennsylvania, and he formed relationships there with wealthy families in Kuwait and Jordan. And from a lot of the documents, it looks like these relationships introduced him to some of the world's biggest sovereign wealth funds, where he got to meet some of the key members. This is going to be incredibly important, and with his numerous connections, Jho Low formed his own investment group and recruited princes, sheiks, and other powerful people. The company made massive purchases, like an $87 million real estate purchase in Kuala Lumpur. In 2009, Jho Low consolidated all his investment companies under one name, Jewel Capital. The company made record-breaking purchases, including EMI Music Publishing for $2.2 billion, New York's Park Lane Hotel for $66 million, and Coastal Energy for $2.2 billion. And you can actually still access their website if you want to check out some of these purchases yourself. I had a lot of fun looking through the websites and reading the press releases. And it's sort of crazy what Jewel Capital was doing at the time, buying up some of the biggest real estates in the world. And it was really hard to gauge where all that money was actually coming from. That same year, he was also chosen to be a consultant for the 1MDB fund, probably because of his relationship with Riza Aziz. Riza is a stepson of the Prime Minister who formed the 1MDB fund, and because of that relationship, Jho Low became the obvious choice. And it looks like the $250,000 high school in London, England actually paid off for him. Basically, Jho Low was hired because he was a friend of the family, and in this situation, he was a friend of a powerful family. And you can say that on the surface, the 1MDB fund was probably one of the best things to happen to the people of Malaysia. And just like any other sovereign wealth fund, it acted like a public investment account where the returns would go into projects and programs, like funding schools, retirement, and social welfare. The $6.5 billion raised by the fund was supposed to be invested into real estate, energy, and stocks, but with hindsight, we can see that the money never really ended up doing any of that. Some of that money went straight in the hands of Jho Low, who threw parties and purchased gifts. He gifted Kim Kardashian a $325,000 Ferrari for her birthday. He gifted Leonardo DiCaprio a Basquiat and Picasso painting valued at $3.2 million. And he gave the supermodel Miranda Kerr a $1 million grand piano along with a set of diamond earrings and necklaces worth $8 million. I think one of the craziest stories I heard about Jho Low was that he took a Taiwanese singer on a $1 million date. The two supposedly dined in Dubai, and there were private fireworks, 2 men parachuted in the middle of the date. And she also got, I think, a $20,000 necklace, which is beyond me. And the saddest part about this whole process was we kind of now know where all this money came from. It came directly from the 1MDB fund, to which he consulted and helped manage. Basically, he was taking money meant for building up the community and using it to impress celebrities who probably don't really care about him. And do you remember that $1 million date I just told you about? Well, that girl actually ended up saying no to his proposals, even after dropping that much money. And this is actually her today with some other guy who I have no idea who he is, but yeah. Now this is a map of how the money was moved out of the 1MDB fund. And you can see that it all started here, and the money basically scattered and moved into accounts around the world. After investigation, we now have the basics of how the money was moved out of the 1MDB account. The first way is that he would transfer money into bank accounts of companies whose names resemble legitimate businesses, and then the money would be moved again into private hands. Some of the fake companies created just for this purpose includes BlackRock Commodities Limited, which is not the BlackRock that's listed on the S&P index. Affinity Equity International Partners, which is not the Affinity Equity Partners or the private equity company. and Petro Saudi, which should not be confused with Petro Saudi International Limited. Another way he was able to move money out of the 1MDB fund is moving money among bank accounts until the original source is lost, or the path to the money got so confusing that it was impossible to recover. And the last way he would move money is transferring to trust accounts at local US law firms where client confidentiality laws made the transfer difficult to locate. Altogether, $4 billion were moved out of the 1MDB fund through these means, and the money was moved into the hands of the Prime Minister of Malaysia, who started the fund, his stepson who helped Jho Low get the job, and many other top officials. And these recipients would spend the money on acquiring huge amounts of properties and even spending the money on pretty ridiculous things. The Prime Minister's wife spent about $30 million alone on jewelry, and Jho Low's friend here, Riza, would put about $100 million into the Wolf of Wall Street movie, and even put forth how many $1 million into an after party where Kanye West was invited, and the whole production team basically had a blast. From all the court hearings I read, it looks like Jho Low was considered the central figure in this crime. Details reveal that Jho Low had complete control of the investment choices at 1MDB. He also sent the Prime Minister's aides to secret missions in China and also the Middle East to bail out the 1MDB account when things were going south. And a good chunk of the money also traveled through his account first before ending up in the hands of top Malaysian officials, including the Prime Minister. In one example, the money flowed into Petro Saudi, but not all of the money actually made it into Petro Saudi. Of the $1 billion sent, only $300 million actually made it into the company. The other $700 million went straight into Jho Low's account. And from there, it went through a number of accounts until it ended up in the Prime Minister's hand. In 2015, the 1MDB fraud started to become apparent when the fund missed a $550 million loan payment. And this was after the fact that the fund raised an extra $6.5 billion between 2012 and 2013 from bonds issued by Goldman Sachs. That same year, we also discovered that the Prime Minister received $700 million from the 1MDB fund and 227,000 documents leaked into public hands, pointing to a suspected fraud. As a response, a Malaysian task force was formed to figure out exactly what had happened. And the US Department of Defense estimated that $4.5 billion were stolen in total. In 2018, the Malaysian task force seized more than $273 million worth of assets from the Prime Minister. And during this whole time, Jho Low was already an international fugitive on the run. He is suspected to have fled to Cyprus since he received a passport from the country back in 2015. And just to show you how money talks around the world, he reportedly received the passport after only investing in the country for 2 days. I'm not really sure how much money he invested, but that's pretty crazy to me. 2 days to get a citizenship in this country. And it's also believed that he's moving through countries like Thailand, China, Indonesia, and using his money and influence to shield himself from prosecution. And this is because from a lot of the documents, it looks like a lot of other countries were involved in this mess, including Saudi Arabia and also China. In 2020, an audio tape revealed that the former Prime Minister who created the 1MDB fund was seeking help from the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi to cover this mess up. And in July of this year, the former Prime Minister was sentenced to 12 years in prison and fined about $50 million on 7 accounts of abuse of power, money laundering, and criminal breach of trust. And his stepson, Jho Low's childhood best friend Riza Aziz, forfeited $60 million in property and currently have all charges dropped against him for helping the US recover some of the missing assets. And we also can't forget about Goldman Sachs here. It turns out that 2 members of the company were being bribed here, and they basically ignored some pretty strong evidence about the 1MDB fund, leading to the $6.5 billion bond offering that I mentioned earlier. Today, Goldman Sachs is fined about $3.1 billion for their involvement in the 1MDB fraud. I wouldn't call this complete justice, but it is what it is as of right now. Jho Low himself is still on the run, and he even tried to bribe the Justice Department by offering an employee $75 million to have his charges dropped. Although Jho Low was a central piece to this fraud, it becomes kinda obvious to me that dozens of officials were also involved. And at one point, the Prime Minister was even exonerated by the Attorney General for his crimes. You can see that the problems here are pretty systematic, and the people of Malaysia need to think about possible ways to prevent this in the future because the money that was supposed to go to them went into yachts and parties. Now, this is definitely not as easy as I put it, but with this level of corruption at the highest level, it really makes you think twice about what is actually happening in the government. Not to mention that other countries like Thailand was also helping in this crime. Some of the journalists who tried to uncover this mess were sent to jail, and some of them were forced to admit to things that they didn't actually do. And out of the $4.5 billion that went missing, only $833 million were ever recovered. And I really do wonder where all that money actually ended up, and if that money is actually hiding in plain sight. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I had a lot of fun researching this whole video, and I learned a lot about the 1MDB fund. If you guys have any suggestions on what other videos or other topics I should cover, make sure you let me know. And if you guys are interested in any products, make sure you click in the links below. And yeah, again, I'll see you guys next time.